Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott. Today we're talking about the July 2021 crash of a Challenger jet that was doing a circling approach at the Truckee, California airport. The NTSB just released its final report on that accident, and there's a lot that GA pilots can learn from it. Earlier this week in episode 286, we talked with Lawrence Balter about how the GA community in Hawaii is flying relief supplies to help victims of Maui's wildfires. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/286. And so that you don't miss next week's episode, go to whatever app that you're using to listen to me and take a moment right now and touch that subscribe key. Or if you're using the Apple Podcast app, touch the follow key so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. And this is a listener-supported show, and you're a listener, so please help support the show. To do that, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome to sign up to make a monthly donation, or make a one-time donation by going to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And when you do, I'll read your name on the show. Coming up in the news for the week of August 14th, 2023, Citation jet comes close to a 737 at San Diego Airport. The Coast Guard has stopped searching for a pair of 172 pilots. And a kitty lost at Oshkosh found its way home. All this and more, and the news starts now. From paddleyourown.canoe.com, private jet comes within 100 feet of landing on top of Southwest Airlines 737 at San Diego. A private jet came within 100 feet of landing on top of a Southwest Boeing 737 at San Diego on Friday after an air traffic controller accidentally cleared the plane to land on the same runway that the Southwest aircraft was taxiing along. In a statement, the FAA said that a preliminary investigation has found that an air traffic controller gave a landing clearance to the Cessna, despite the fact that Southwest Flight 2493 to San Jose had been told to taxi onto the same runway and hold in preparation for takeoff. A radar-based ASDX ground collision detection system alerted the controller to the potential of a collision, and the controller ordered the pilot of the Citation to go around. And I found out some more information about this, and I'll talk about it during the updates section right after the news. From erroneous.net, Coast Guard suspends search for missing pilots. The U.S. Coast Guard has suspended the search for two occupants of an overdue Cessna 172, last seen on Friday, August 4th, between the islands of St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. Officials from the Center of Radar Approach Control, or CRAP, notified U.S. Coast Guard Sector San Juan watchstanders at approximately 9:30 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time on Friday, so that would have been at night, that radar contact with a Cessna 172 had been lost 6 statute miles west of St. Thomas. Coast Guard watchstanders ordered the launch of a Coast Guard Jayhawk helicopter and a boat forces detachment rescue crew to search the area in which the aircraft was feared down. The missing aircraft departed Puerto Rico intending to make a round-robin flight with a practice approach in St. Thomas. Coast Guard Sector San Juan Commander Captain Jose Diaz stated, quote, "Suspending search efforts is one of the hardest decisions to be made, but after saturating the search area with no signs of the downed aircraft, I've suspended the search pending further developments." Rescue crews searched an area spanning approximately 6,300 square miles over a combined total of 45 hours. From paddleyourown.canoe.com, United Airlines Boeing 777 plunged to within 750 feet of hitting ocean after co-pilot misheard the captain's instructions. United 777 that had just taken off from Maui bound for San Francisco last December plunged 1,400 feet in just a few seconds and came within 748 feet of hitting the Pacific Ocean because the first officer misheard instructions given to him by the captain. An NTSB investigation has concluded. Following the incident, United didn't report the event, but the NTSB decided to open its own investigation after learning of the circumstances some 2 months later. By this point, data from the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder had already been wiped, but the NTSB was able to piece together what happened after the captain and first officer agreed to provide interviews to investigators. It turns out that the terrifying incident unfolded after the FO misheard just one word and a set of instructions by the captain. The instruction related to the settings of the flaps. On takeoff from Maui, the captain had set the flaps to a setting of 20, but during the climb, the airplane started shaking because of turbulence in the air, causing the speed of the plane to go up and down. The captain, who had more than 19,600 hours of flying experience, asked the first officer to adjust the flap setting to 5 in order to make the aircraft more streamlined. But the first officer told investigators he mistakenly thought the captain had asked for the flaps to be set to setting 15. This caused the speed of the plane to go up too quickly, and at this point the captain started to figure out what was going on and again asked the co-pilot to adjust the flap setting to 5. On this occasion, the FO heard the captain's correct command and set the flap setting correctly. Following the incident, United said it closely coordinated with the FAA, and this resulted in both pilots receiving additional training. From generalaviationnews.com, jet blast bends a Cessna 172, and this comes from the NTSB final report. It says, the flight instructor reported that while taxiing the Cessna 172 on a taxiway at the airport in Tucson, Arizona, a commercial turbine-powered airplane powered up to move on to the runway. As the commercial airplane turned, it kept a very high level of thrust, according to the CFI. The jet blast lifted the instructor's airplane onto its propeller and right wing. The right wing was substantially damaged as well as the propeller. Probable cause, the pilot's failure to maintain a safe distance from a large turbine-powered airplane, resulting in an encounter of the turbine-powered airplane's jet blast while taxiing. Also from generalaviationnews.com, wrong frequency leads to citation versus Cherokee on runway. And this comes from multiple ASRS reports written by the 3 pilots involved. The Piper Cherokee pilot wrote, "Today we were using runway XX at airport ZZZ. Myself and one other plane were using XX. Winds were calm, and XX is the winds calm runway. Both planes were making comms, and we made our announcement of taking the runway. We were doing a short field takeoff, so holding brakes and throttle full. As we were making our final check, a citation took runway YY without making any calls. We closed the throttle, and I immediately got onto the comms and announced to the citation, aircraft X currently on active XX. No comms came back from the citation, and they started their roll. I had to take controls, and we had no taxiway I could exit off in time, so I taxied close to the grass. Before pulling off into the grass, I saw the citation had lifted off, so I held short of the grass and the citation climbed out above us as we were on the active runway. Both myself and the other airplane in the pattern attempted to reach the citation throughout all of this, but they were not responding or communicating anything." And this is the citation captain's narrative. He wrote, "While taxiing out, we did not notice any other traffic on the ground or in the air. Wind was calm and we opted to use runway YY as we were departing to the north. We called for and received an IFR release from approach with no other advisories. We made taxi calls and a departure announcement on COM 1 and communicated with approach on COM 2. As we took the runway for departure, we did not see any traffic on the runway and proceeded to depart. As we accelerated to V1, I became aware of a Piper-type aircraft sitting on the opposite end of the runway with no lights on. I opted to continue the departure as I felt an abort would result in a more likely risk of collision. After becoming airborne and clear of any risk, I realized that somehow COM 1 was inadvertently set to the wrong frequency, and it was not noticed due to expectation that there was no traffic, and thus not uncommon for a lack of radio communication for an early morning departure. I will be checking and double-checking that the correct frequency is entered prior to movement." And the citation's first officer wrote, in part, "At such an early departure time, there is seldom any traffic at the airport, and I was not anticipating any. Making absolutely sure correct frequencies are loaded and then checking them again for accuracy." And I think I mentioned in the past that recently I was at the Tracy Airport in California and commented to the pilot that I was with that there was an airplane that was not making radio calls. And of course, it was soon after that that we figured out that we were the ones on the wrong frequency. So always check your frequency. From live5news.com, and my thanks to Ed Kelly for sending this to me, preliminary report released on Charleston County Sheriff's helicopter crash. The crash happened on August 1st at approximately 3:30 p.m. and involved the Sheriff's Office Bell Helicopter Textron Canada 407. Investigators with the FAA confirmed substantial damage to the fuselage, main rotor system, and tail rotor system. They also found one of 2 bolts that secure the lever assemblies in the tail rotor control system was missing and that the other bolt was in place but loose. The report states that the cotter pin for its attachment nut was also missing. The report states maintenance records revealed the bolts would have been removed and reinstalled during recent maintenance on June 28th, about 15 flight hours prior to the accident. The crash happened as the helicopter was returning to Charleston from the Sumter Airport. Investigators say that about 35 minutes into the flight, the pilot reported the helicopter was starting to yaw slowly to the right. When he attempted to apply the left pedal, The helicopter did not respond, leading the pilot to tell investigators, quote, "It felt as if the pedals were not attached." The pilot contacted Charleston International and declared an emergency and set up for an approach to runway 15. Quote, "While crossing the runway threshold, about 20 feet above ground level, the helicopter started to yaw to the right. He lowered the collective, but the helicopter continued to yaw right," the report states. He then reduced the throttle and attempted to maintain a level attitude. The helicopter struck the ground adjacent to the runway at a high rate of descent, coming to rest in the grass adjacent to runway 15. The tail rotor boom severed during the impact sequence. The pilot was hospitalized with non-life-threatening injuries after the crash. Sheriff's Office spokesman Andrew Knapp said, "It's been a very effective helicopter. We've used it on a lot of missions, and it's been very effective for us," he said. From generalaviationnews.com, overloading Aranca proved fatal for pilot and his son. And this comes from an NTSB final report. It says, according to the manager of Flying Oaks Airport, that's 2 Tango Echo 2 in Fort Worth, Texas, the pilot was going to conduct a local flight with his son in the Aranca 7AC. The pilot was seated in the rear seat, and his son was in the front seat. Multiple witnesses saw the airplane take off from runway 15. One witness, a CFI, reported that during the initial takeoff roll, the airplane became out of control and almost ground-looped. He described the subsequent takeoff roll as extra long and stated that the airplane appeared to get slow during the initial climb. He reported that the airplane started to roll to the right, the left wing fell, and the airplane stalled and entered a spin about 100 feet above ground. A second witness reported that during the takeoff, the airplane appeared to be barely climbing. Near the end of the runway, about 100 feet AGL, he observed a strong right yaw, followed by a gradual left turn. The pilot appeared to lower the nose, then the airplane rolled hard left and entered a spin. The airplane came to rest about 1,100 feet southeast of the departure end of runway 15. The plane sustained substantial damage to the fuselage and both wings. Both the pilot and his son died in the crash. The ATP-rated pilot purchased the plane in May 2021, just 3 months before the accident. Utilizing the airplane's weight and balance records and the weights of the two occupants, weight and balance values were calculated by the accident investigators, who found that at the time of departure, the airplane was 225 pounds over the maximum gross weight, while the center of gravity was within limitations. The airplane, which had flight controls at both positions, only had flight instruments for the front seat. The airplane was not equipped with flaps, a stall warning system, or an angle of attack indicator. Probable cause: the pilot's exceedance of the airplane's critical angle of attack during the initial climb, which resulted in an aerodynamic stall. Contributing to the accident was the pilot's inadequate pre-flight planning, which resulted in an exceedance of the airplane's weight and balance limitations and decreased takeoff performance. From avweb.com, fatal ferry flight attempted despite known defects. Despite a major fuel leak, a history of defects with the airplane, and the refusal by 3 other pilots to fly the aircraft, the owner of a Piper Navajo elected to attempt a ferry flight and died in a crash a few seconds after takeoff. The NTSB's preliminary report on the crash at Kearney, Missouri, on July 20th, included anecdotes from multiple witnesses who reported malfunctioning engines and fuel tanks that leaked horribly on the plane, which was last airworthy 8 years prior. The lineman who fueled the plane that day took a video of avgas pouring from the aircraft onto the ramp. The NTSB said numerous witnesses shot video and stills of the takeoff attempt that showed the airplane becoming briefly airborne before settling back onto the runway. The recordings showed the airplane became airborne near the runway end and yawed to the right before it climbed parallel with the rising terrain. The witnesses observed the airplane barely cleared a line of trees past the departure end of the runway and made a left turn before it disappeared behind trees. The plane crashed in a field near the airport and caught fire. The plane had been at Kearney for about 6 months, and the owner and a mechanic had been working on it over that period. About 2 weeks before the crash, witnesses told the NTSB an engine run-up revealed a hard-starting engine that wouldn't make full power. The owner had obtained a ferry permit to take it to Kingman, Kansas for an annual inspection. From aviation-safety.net, Citabria takes flight on its own. And these stories come out every few years, and this one is pretty similar to the ones we've seen in the past. It says the privately registered Blanca 7G CBC Citabria, tail number Charlie Golf Victor Alpha Uniform, so this is a Canadian registration, was located at Schlenkers Field in Alberta, 3 nautical miles south of Medicine Hat Airport. The owner pulled the aircraft out of its hangar to do a run-up and perform the annual oil change. The aircraft engine had not been run for about a year. The aircraft battery was not on site, and a car battery was obtained and connected using jumper cables. The owner climbed into the aircraft, set the parking brake, turned on the mags and master switches, and after priming the engine, pushed the starter button. The engine did not turn over due to the battery being dead. The owner exited the cockpit without turning the mags and master off and retrieved a charged battery. After connecting the charged battery to the aircraft system, he paused to turn the prop through in an effort to pre-oil the engine. He was standing behind the prop, but in front of the wing strut. The owner moved the prop in the direction of rotation a short distance, and the engine started. The aircraft began to creep forward, overcoming the set parking brake. The owner attempted to reach for the mixture control, and the throttle was inadvertently moved to the full open position. The engine RPM increased, and the aircraft began to accelerate. The owner was no longer able to keep up with the aircraft and stepped away from the aircraft. The aircraft was in a right turn by this time. The aircraft proceeded down a taxiway and across runway 725 and into the field beyond. The aircraft became airborne and established itself in a shallow climbing turn for the next 20 to 30 minutes. The aircraft proceeded north over the desert bloom area of Medicine Hat until it ran out of fuel. It then began a gliding descent and eventually crashed into a field just west of the South Ridge residential area of Medicine Hat. The aircraft came to rest against a house causing damage. There was no fire and no one was injured. The aircraft was substantially damaged. And finally, from flyingbag.com, and a story written by my friend Meg Guadaluski, Stuffy the Kitty makes it home. And the story starts out with that this is an update on a story that they talked about previously about the search for the owner of a stuffed animal found at EAA AirVenture. The toy cat named Stuffy was returned to her owner today, 6-year-old Braden Eveleth of Grandview, Iowa, who opened the box in the backseat of his mother's car and was reunited with the plush toy. Stuffy was accidentally left behind in the KidVenture zone of AirVenture late last month. EAA volunteer Gary Sternberg posted a photo of the plushy cat on Facebook on July 28th, and the story went viral. Sternberg told Flying that he knows these childhood attachment objects are very special to someone, so he takes a vested interest in their return to the owners. As it turns out, this toy is extra special, as it is a calming, microwavable stuffed animal. When heated, it gives off a lavender scent that is very soothing. It was also an early birthday gift to Eveleth, whose birthday fell during the AirVenture celebration. According to his mother, the family loves aviation, and Braden was looking forward to having his birthday at the show. He decided to bring the toy with him. He lost Stuffy on Monday the 24th while at KidVenture, she said. He was building rockets and airplanes and had the toy with him. Then he put it down and got up and forgot it. When the family realized the toy was gone, they backtracked, checking all over KidVenture and walking the path they took to their campsite. But the beloved plush cat was nowhere to be found. Braden cried all afternoon, his mother said. We went to the lost and found on the main ground and left our name and number just in case someone turned it in. Braden was devastated all week because we couldn't find it. EAA members, upon hearing about the wayward toy, spread the word online. Sternberg's and Flying Magazine's posts about the missing toy were copied and shared. Come on, guys, let's help this kitty get home, one post read. The story and posts were shared and shared and shared again until contact was established, and the Eveleth learned the toy had been turned into lost and found and became a media sensation. His mother said when she showed the image to Braden, he said, "That's my kitty." He was so ecstatic. He was crying tears of joy. Well, what a great story. That's the news for this week. Coming up next, a few of my updates. And later we'll talk about the final NTSB report on a Challenger that crashed while circling at Truckee, California 2 years ago. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And let's start with the good news. First, congratulations to my client, Max Nolsky. Yes, I was flying with a Max. He passed his commercial multi in our Diamond DA-42. So congratulations, Max. And if you're interested in getting your multi or doing some training in that aircraft, let me know. And here's something that I found on Reddit. This relates to our first news story, which talks about the citation that flew low over a Southwest jet that was on the runway at San Diego. This comes from Reddit. No way to know if this is accurate, but it certainly seems like it was. The person writes, I'm the pilot of November 21110 Alpha. I was on the north side of the runway, waiting in line for departure number 1 at Charlie 1. At Charlie 1, you have a very good view of approaching aircraft. Here's the ATIS I received at the time. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it said the winds were 210 at 8, visibility 10, broken at 1,300 feet, and overcast at 1,800. He writes, marginal conditions, fairly typical for the area. I was IFR, and my initial clearance had me climbing to 5,000, expected flight level 200 after 10 minutes, departing to the north. I was headed to San Jose. He says, at the time I taxied out, there was only me on the north, and I think he means the north side of the runway. I think 3 jets on the south, so there will be 4 aircraft that were waiting to depart. He says because there's only one runway, ATC interleaves departing traffic with arriving traffic, and it's very busy. Line up and wait is used all the time to expedite departures, and in my opinion, it enhances safety, not detracts, by giving pilots time to line up and complete final checks before departing and not be rushed. After Southwest 2493 got his line up and wait, I believe the controller got an amendment to my clearance from departure. This, I believe, was the distraction, and when she tried to relay my amended clearance, she lost track of the Southwest flight. For those not aware, at this time, when lined up at the runway waiting for departure, we are not on ground control, we are on tower frequency. Ground could not have relayed the clearance, I wouldn't have heard it, and they wouldn't be expecting me to hear it. In my opinion, the mistake that happened here was the controller tried to give me an amended clearance at a very bad time. 4 Hotel Victor was on short final, with Southwest 2493 lined up on the runway. In my opinion, she should have just waited to give me my amended clearance when it was my turn to depart. Her first attempt was blocked, and I didn't hear it. The second time I acknowledged ready to copy, she started to relay it, and it got blocked again. At this point in time, I was watching 4 Hotel Victor on the skyline, and I was thinking to myself, this isn't going to work. I stayed off frequency at this point and was getting ready to speak up if needed when 4 Hotel Victor chimed in to confirm landing. He knew something was up, clarified with tower, and ended up going around. Now, don't forget, at San Diego, the threshold is significantly offset from the runway start, so 4 Hotel Victor would not have landed on the Southwest regardless. Anyhow, like I said, I knew that there would be some urgent communication coming quickly, either from Tower, 4 Hotel Victor, or me, so I stayed off frequency after Tower's second attempt to deliver my altitude amendment got stepped on. By the way, I think that's a really good point to think about. If you recognize that there's something going on and there's probably a higher priority transmission that's going to be coming up pretty quickly, just stay off the frequency. He continues, 4 Hotel Victor initiated communication about the same time Tower gave the go-around. Honestly, from my perspective, watching everything, I was surprised at the Southwest pilots. When I'm given lineup and wait with aircraft on final, I'm expecting to go pretty quickly. After a couple of minutes on the runway, I would have said something. If you listen to the live ATC recording, the Southwest pilots were, from my perspective, unaware of what transpired. The tone I heard was a peeved pilot at the delays in departing, not a concerned pilot due to a conflict. As PIC of my aircraft, I'm responsible for the control and safety of flight, not ATC, and while ATC made a mistake here, the Southwest pilots were passive. Watching this unfold in front of me, 4 Hotel Victor did pretty much what I would have done. He clearly wasn't going to land on the Southwest flight. He initiated confirmation with Tower, maybe a tad later than I would have, but the frequency was also getting blocked with chatter, so that's understandable. 4 Hotel Victor took charge when he saw something amiss and was ready to go around. He almost had to go around a second time. Listen to the entire audio clip. From a PIC perspective, I personally would fault the Southwest pilots for not saying something when they knew there was a fast jet on short final and they're just sitting on the runway for a couple of minutes. And he goes on with a kind of a summary of everything that he just talked about. Toward the end of it, he says, Tower has flight 2493 exit at Charlie 2 and get behind me. I'm right in front of them at Charlie 1. The Southwest pilots expressed displeasure at departure delays. They don't know what happened. They're concerned that they might be number 5 for departure now. The tower controller was quite good and on top of things even when stuff fell apart, and she still kept her cool even when things went sideways. This was a controller mistake, but heaven knows the controllers have saved me from myself more times than I can count. We are all human, and thank goodness in the aviation community, we all look out for each other. Here the system worked. The pilot of 4 Hotel Victor maintained situational awareness and control of his plane and was ready to go around. When he knew something was amiss, he reached out to Tower, but from what I saw, he was primed and ready to go around, exactly as a PIC should. The proximity system, and here he's talking about the ASDX radar in the tower, also kicked in and alerted the controller exactly as the backup system should. The Southwest pilot's situational awareness, not so much in my opinion, but everything else worked as it should. And it continues, in my opinion, this is mostly a non-event. A mistake was made just like mistakes are made everywhere, every day, and everything worked out exactly as it should. So again, there's no way to know if this is accurate, but of course it certainly sounds plausible, so I thought I would share that with you. And here's an email message I just received from a pilot in Hawaii. And she writes, "Thank you so much for spreading the word about our efforts here in Hawaii to bring relief to Maui. It was great to hear Lawrence's story and learn about the Kahului Airport community's efforts. Everyone in the GA community here has been incredible. Because this effort has been so grassroots, none of us know much about what is happening at other airfields. We're also all really busy flying supplies. This whole effort has been amazing to see and be a part of. I'm a member of the Kona GA community, and I'm one of the 2 pilots who flew the 100 pounds of insulin. The whole delivery was the result of the tireless efforts of people in Kona, and I want to make sure they are seen and appreciated. Lawrence is absolutely correct that there are people alive today who would not be except for that delivery. I was so grateful to be able to bring that load to the people who needed it. It was the most important flight I've ever made. I'm also so thankful to the woman in Kona who has tirelessly organized the supplies and donations and red tape. If it weren't for her and her incredible efforts, our flight with the insulin would not have happened. She was steadfast in finding a way through all bureaucratic hoops on our way. I'm also incredibly grateful for my friend who flew right seat. He made one of the very first flights into Lahaina last Wednesday, immediately after the fires, to evacuate someone. The super high winds, gust, and extensive TFR were all happening exactly as Lawrence described them, and yet he managed to make that flight and reunite the woman he evacuated with her family. And I'm also immensely grateful to the owner of the Cessna 172 we flew to deliver the insulin for loaning the plane for that purpose. It's important for people to know that the entire Hawaii GA community has stepped forward. For example, Kona launched at least half a dozen small single-engine piston planes, a Cessna Caravan, and several helicopters, all at least twice a day, in the first 3 days. We're still running about 3 planes twice a day now. The effort on the part of the Maui pilots has been unsurpassed, but we on the neighboring islands have wanted to contribute as much as we can, and I think and hope we have. Thank you so much again for highlighting the amazing efforts of the GA community here. I love your podcast and appreciate all you do." Well, thanks so much for your email and sharing more information about the relief efforts that are going on in Hawaii. And I'm not going to bore you with the details, but as I mentioned last week, Patreon had a major follow-up, and we lost about 7% of our supporters. And that happened, I think, across the entire spectrum of people that use Patreon. And unfortunately, we will not get most of those back because of that follow-up. So if you've been thinking about supporting the show, man, this would be a really great time to step up and help backfill for all the folks that we lost. And a few of you have already done that. So my thanks to the folks who joined in the last week at the $35 a month level, which includes my online courses. Thanks to Colin Caddy and Patrick Hunt. At the $20 a month level, which includes my videos, Jim. And at the $8 a month where we get show notes, that's Chaz Ryan and Jeremy Gross. Thanks so much for stepping up to sign up, become supporters via Patreon. We also had some one-time donations via PayPal. My thanks to Curtis Creamer for a $100 donation and to Graham Fig for $20. If you'd like to support the show, it is just so easy. Takes only a couple of minutes. Go out onto the web, enter aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, and you can sign up to make a monthly donation via Patreon. Or for those one-time donations, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. Thanks so much for your support. Coming up next, we're going to talk about that fatal circling crash by a Challenger jet at Truckee, California. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. A few days ago, the NTSB released its final report of the July 2021 crash of a Challenger 605 jet that was doing a circling approach at the Truckee, California airport. And there's a lot that we GA pilots can learn from this accident. Now, one, which we've talked about in the past, is that circling approaches are 25 times more risky than straight-in precision approaches, and pilots should avoid doing them whenever possible. And the second is that degraded pilot performance, if you're a single pilot, or degraded crew performance when you're flying with another pilot, should be a red flag to you. And when you're performing poorly, either as a single pilot or as a crew, it makes sense to go around or to fly the published missed approach, rather than hoping that a bad approach is going to magically get better. When we fly, hope is a lousy strategy, and going around can give you the time to figure out what you need to do better on your next approach. I talked briefly about this crash a few days after it happened at the end of episode 197. I said at the time that, quote, eyewitness reports are not always reliable, but it's entirely possible that while correcting for an overshoot from base to final, the aircraft had a stall spin accident. Well, the NTSB report confirms that that is essentially what happened, though it was just a stall and not a spin. I also mentioned it again in episode 199 when I talked about the challenges of flying a circling approach, which I've always said is the most difficult and most dangerous thing that instrument pilots do. And in that episode, I talked about an ICAO document that states that a circling approach has 25 times the risk of flying an ILS or straight-in GPS approach with vertical guidance, such as an LPV. Interestingly, the NTSB report talks about how the Challenger pilots had the option of choosing a straight-in approach to runway 11, which would have been 25 times safer than the circling approach that they chose to make to runway 11. There's a lot more to this accident that we can all learn from. In a moment, I'm going to read from the NTSB final report. But first, I want to talk about the experience of the two pilots and about the weather. According to the report, the pilot flying in the left seat was a 43-year-old male with nearly 5,700 hours of total time. However, he only had 235 hours of time in the Challenger. Records showed that the captain passed his check ride, which included a non-precision approach, stall prevention, and a go-around rejected landing. However, the instructor comments for the practice simulator sessions noted that he rushed checklist, needed to slow down and read the checklist requirements, and needed to set up approach procedures without prompts from the pilot monitoring. According to the Flight Operator's General Operating Manual, or GOM, the captain as PIC would have been, quote, directly responsible for and was the final authority as to the operation of the accident airplane. The first officer was a 56-year-old male with a total of 14,300 hours in all aircraft and over 4,400 hours in the Challenger, so he was by far the more experienced pilot in the aircraft. It's worth noting that in the NTSB report it said, quote, the FO, or first officer, had acted as an instructor to the captain throughout the flight, and that may explain some of the crew interaction issues that occurred near the very end of the flight. Now, this was the first pairing of this crew with the operator. The captain, who had signed an employment contract with the operator, but was not yet an employee at the time, was operating the flight under contract to the operator until he could be onboarded. The FO, who was the pilot monitoring and second in command during the accident flight, was not the accident operator's employee at the time of the accident and had been hired as a contract pilot for the accident flight. The accident occurred in the daytime at 1:18 p.m. The weather observations at Truckee for 12:45 p.m. were captured by an AWOS at the airport and showed visibility of 4 statute miles, ceiling broken at 2,300 feet AGL, and variable visibility between 3.5 and 5 miles from smoke in the area. And I should note that there were wildfires in the area. A cockpit voice recorder captured that the FO received the weather observations at 12:51 p.m. from the AWOS at Truckee and relayed most of those observations to the captain, though he did not mention that the visibility was variable. Now let's get to the NTSB report. This comes from the analysis section. The captain and first officer departed on a non-revenue flight operating under IFR with 4 passengers bound for Truckee, California. Most of the flight was uneventful. During the descent, ATC told the flight crew to expect the RNAV GPS approach for runway 20. The captain, who was the pilot flying, or PF, stated, and the FO, who was the pilot monitoring, or PM, calculated and confirmed that runway 20 was too short for the landing distance required by the airplane at its expected landing weight. Instead of making a request to ATC for the straight-in approach to runway 11, which was the longer runway, the captain told the FO that they could take the runway 20 approach and circle to land on runway 11, and the FO relayed this information to ATC. ATC approved and the flight crew accepted the circle to land approach. Although the descent checklist required that the flight crew brief the new circle to land approach, and the flight crew's acceptance of the new approach invalidated the previous straight-in approach brief, they failed to brief the new approach. ATC instructed the flight crew to hold, but the captain was slow in complying with this instruction, so the FO started the turn to enter the holding pattern and then informed ATC once they were established in the hold. About 20 seconds later, ATC cleared them for the approach. Before the FO confirmed the clearance, he asked the captain if he was ready for the approach, and the captain stated that he was. The FO subsequently commented that they had too much airspeed at the beginning of the approach, and then suggested a 360-degree turn to the captain, but the captain never acknowledged the excessive airspeed and refused the 360-degree turn. After the FO visually identified the airport, he told the captain to make a 90-degree right turn to put the airplane on an approximate heading of 290, which was parallel to runway 11 and consistent with the manufacturer's operating manual procedures for the downwind leg of the circling approach. However, the FO instructed the captain to roll out of the turn prematurely, and the captain stopped the turn on a heading of about 233 degrees magnetic, which placed the airplane at an angle 57 degrees left of the downwind course, parallel with runway 11. As a result of the early rollout, the flight crew established a course that required an unnecessarily tight turning radius. When they started the turn to final, the airplane was still about 1.3 nautical miles from the maximum circling radius that was established for the airplane's approach category. And let me just add some more information here. The circling minimums for the RNAV GPS-20 approach that this crew flew are 7,700 feet MSL and 3-mile visibility for Category C. And by the way, that 7,700-foot altitude is 1,796 feet above the airport elevation, which is a very high circling minimum, so it would be easy for a crew to find themselves too high as they turned final. Also in 2013, the FAA introduced revised circling categories, which in most cases increase the distance an aircraft can be from the airport during their circle. For Category C, for MDAs between 7,001 and 9,000 feet, the Category C circling distance is 3.2 miles. So when the NTSB says they were 1.3 from the maximum circling radius, they mean that the crew only flew their downwind 1.9 miles past the runway 11 numbers. Now what's implied by that statement is that the crew could have flown further downwind in their circle, which would have resulted in a longer final and more time to slow up and lose altitude. However, the crew was not on the proper downwind heading. Instead, they were sharply angled toward the final, which means that the farther downwind they flew, the shorter their base leg would be, and the more that they would overshoot the base to final turn. So in this case, with a bad heading that they were on, flying further downwind would probably have just made things worse. Getting back to the NTSB report, the FO also deployed flaps 45 degrees after confirming with the captain. Now it says that the manufacturer's operating manual procedures for the downwind leg call for a flaps setting of 30 degrees, but the manufacturer stated that a flight crew is not prohibited from a flaps 45 degree configuration if the approach remains within the limitations of the airplane's flight manual. The airplane's airspeed was 44 knots above the landing reference speed, or VREF, of 118 knots that the flight crew had calculated earlier in the flight. The FO told the captain, "I'm going to get your speed under control for you." The FO likely reduced the throttles after he made this statement, as the engine fan speeds, or N1, began to decrease from about 88% to around 28%, and the airplane began to slow from 162 knots. After the FO repeatedly attempted to point out the airport to the captain identified the runway. The captain's difficulty in finding the runway might have been the result of reduced visibility in the area due to smoke. The FO continuously reassured and instructed the captain throughout the circle to land portion of the approach. On the base leg to the runway, and about 25 seconds before impact with the ground, the FO started to repeatedly ask for control of the airplane, but neither flight crew member verbalized a positive transfer of control as required by the operator's General Operating Manual, or GOM, and the board wrote, "We could not determine who had control of the airplane during these requests." Now, let me comment on that. There was clearly a breakdown in crew coordination and communication, especially toward the last few seconds of the flight. That one pilot was asking for control and that the other pilot never even acknowledged the request for control shows part of that breakdown. At a minimum, the captain should have said something, even something as simple as no, or "No, I still have the controls." It sounds like the FO could see that things weren't going well, but for whatever reason, the less experienced captain was unwilling to relinquish the controls. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this where things are headed south rapidly, you need to extricate yourself from that situation. Instead of letting a bad situation get progressively worse, just go around and fly the published missed approach. Bad situations rarely make themselves better. Instead of hoping things will get better and that you can somehow salvage the approach for the landing, just go around. That will give you the time and space to figure out why things weren't going well and what you should do differently on the next approach, or whether you should instead fly to your alternate. Getting back to the NTSB report, as the airplane crossed the runway extended centerline while maneuvering toward the runway, the FO noted that the airplane was too high. One of the pilots, and the recorded flight data did not indicate which, fully deployed the flight spoilers, likely to increase the airplane's sink rate. The flight spoilers are deployed using a single control lever accessible to both pilots. The airspeed at the time was 135 knots, still 17 knots above the VREF based on the basic operating weight programmed into the airplane's FMS system. About 7 seconds later, the left bank became steeper, and the stall protection system, or SPS, stick shaker and stick pusher engaged. The captain asked the FO, "What are you doing?" And the FO again asked the captain multiple times to let him have the airplane. The stick shaker and stick pusher then briefly disengaged before engaging again. The airplane then entered a rapid left roll consistent with a left wing stall and impacted terrain. A post-crash fire consumed most of the wreckage. Analysis of data retrieved from the Flight Data Recorder, or FDR, indicated that the engines were functioning normally at the time of impact, and there were no indications of a flight control or system malfunction. Most of the wreckage was consumed by the post-crash fire. Examination of the primary flight control surfaces did not reveal any pre-impact mechanical anomalies. Engine data from the accident flight did not show any interruptions in power or suggest any mechanical anomalies with the power production capabilities of either engine. Now let's go to the section called Flight Crew Performance. It says, the captain and FO were appropriately qualified to perform their respective duties as PIC and second in command of the accident flight, which was the first pairing of this crew for the operator. And let me just jump in and expand upon their qualifications. Both pilots had first-class medicals with no waivers or limitations. Both of them held ATP certificates for multi-engine land aircraft. The first officer was also rated for single-engine land aircraft and was a flight instructor and a CFII. He was also rated in gliders, so not only did he have more total time, he had more experience across different kinds of aircraft and was a flight instructor. Getting back to the NTSB report, a review of operator documentation revealed that the flight complied with the requirements of Part 91 and was not conducted under the operator's Part 135 certificate. The flight crew elected to conduct a circling approach to runway 11 and never ask ATC for the straightened RNAV approach to the desired runway. The crew also failed to brief the new circling approach after previously briefing the anticipated straightened approach. The flight crew's failure to brief the circling approach prevented them from sharing a mental model for how the approach should have been conducted and points to poor crew resource management, or CRM, because they failed to prepare for adverse situations and contingencies such as a missed approach. Because of their lack of preparation, they made critical errors on the approach that reduced the safety margin, which included 1. Flying the circling approach at a higher airspeed than the upper limit specified for the airplane's Category C approach category. And let me just review with you the approach speeds for the different categories. Per FAR 97.3, aircraft approach category means a grouping of aircraft based on a speed of VREF if specified, or if VREF is not specified, 1.3 VSO, which would be stall speed in the landing configuration, at the maximum certificated landing weight. Category A would be speeds less than 91 knots. Category B, speeds of 91 knots but less than 121 knots. Category C, speeds of 121 knots or more but less than 141 knots. According to the NTSB report, the Challenger was in Category C but was being flown faster than the 141 knots upper speed for that category. And as we've discussed before, an aircraft's turn radius is proportional to the square of its speed. So that means if you're flying 10% faster, the turn radius will be 21% larger, making it even more likely that an aircraft will overshoot the base to final turn. So getting back to the report, it says, just to recap, because of their lack of preparation, they made critical errors on the approach that reduced the safety margin, which included 1, flying the circling approach at a higher airspeed than the upper limit specified for the airplane's Category C approach category, which we just talked about. 2, failing to establish the airplane on the downwind leg of the circle land approach. And 3, failing to visually identify the runway early in the approach, likely due to obscuration by smoke. The airplane's higher airspeed reduced the flight crew's time to configure the airplane, assess their position relative to the runway, and make corrections to their trajectory, which further reduced the safety margin. During the approach, the FO made several announcements to the captain that the airplane was fast. The captain rejected the FO's suggestion to take a 360-degree turn early in the approach, which would have provided additional time and distance for speed control. The circling approach maneuver began at 160 knots, which was 20 knots higher than the upper limit of the circle-to-land approach speed established for Category C, and did not drop below the Category C maximum speed until the flight crew was preparing to start their base leg turn. The captain's failure to establish the airplane on the downwind leg and the airplane's proximity to the airport during the approach also reduced the safety margin by limiting the space available to align the airplane with the runway centerline. The captain did not establish the airplane on a downwind leg parallel to the destination runway, as depicted in the manufacturer's operating manual, but instead flew a downwind leg that converged on the runway centerline. This tightened the pattern and resulted in an overshoot of the runway centerline only 0.8 nautical miles from the runway threshold during the base to final turn, limiting the crew's ability to properly align the airplane with the runway centerline for final approach. And I'd like to point out one thing about this airplane crossing through the centerline at just 0.8 nautical miles from the runway threshold. 0.8 nautical miles is a very short final. I typically turn final at my home airport about 1.2 or 1.3 miles from the runway in a much slower cirrus. And when I do that, I'm aligned with a final. But this aircraft was passing through the centerline at 0.8 miles, meaning it would have an even shorter final if it were able to correct back to the final. Passing through the centerline that close to the threshold would have been a huge red flag that would have told me that I should go around. Back to the report, the FO received updated weather information from an AWOS early in the approach, which included an advisory of reduced visibility due to heavy smoke in the area, but he did not relay this visibility advisory to the captain, further reducing the safety margin. The smoke likely made it more difficult for the captain to visually identify the airport. The FO reassured the captain throughout the approach about needing to be patient and having plenty of time, despite the time constraints resulting from the fast and tight circling maneuver. These reassurances demonstrated that the FO was aware of the adverse effects of self-induced pressure to perform. However, he exhibited self-induced pressure to salvage a deteriorating approach. In addition, despite the captain not properly setting up the approach, he failed to ask for more time in the holding pattern and rejected the FO's suggestion to use a 360-degree turn to slow the airplane. Without any external pressure to land immediately, the captain's actions indicated a self-induced pressure to perform without being corrected. Now let me just interject. A self-induced pressure to perform without being corrected sounds a little like the sixth proposed FAA hazardous attitude, which is loss of face. Loss of face is, of course, embarrassment that occurs in front of others. And that was the hazardous attitude that CFI Chris described that he had when he talked with us in episode 277 about his self-imposed pressure and stress that led to multiple incidents and accidents. Getting back to the report, following the turn to the base leg, the airplane was not in a position from which it could align with the runway without overshooting the centerline, nor could the pilots execute a normal descent to the runway. Further, the aircraft was not on target or even approaching the flight crew's target VREF of 118 knots. The stabilized approach criteria and the operator's GOM required that the airplane be in a position to execute a normal descent to the runway and that the airspeed be on target or approaching target no later than 500 feet above field elevation in VMC. The accident approach did not meet those criteria and was therefore unstabilized. Once the approach became unstabilized, the crew should have abandoned the approach and gone around but did not. The operator's GOM empowered both pilots to initiate a go-around, and the circumstances of the approach did not preclude a go-around as there was no time or fuel-related pressure to land. Even so, the flight crew never announced a go-around, and the FO did not make call-outs for going around as required in his role as PM. As the PM, it would have been the FO's duty to call for a go-around once the operator's stabilized approach criteria were violated. The flight crew's choice to continue the unstabilized approach rather than go around was consistent with self-induced pressure to perform and degraded decision-making. And let me add one more comment about the FAA's hazardous attitudes. Another hazardous attitude that may be a factor in accidents like this is macho, or the I can do attitude. According to the FAA, pilots who are always trying to prove that they are better than anyone else think, I can do it, I'll show them. Pilots with this type of attitude will try to prove themselves by taking risks in order to impress others. In this case, the captain continued an approach, even though according to the NTSB, the approach was unstable. And the first officer continued to ask for control, presumably to try to salvage the approach. The FAA antidote for the macho attitude is taking chances is foolish, and yet Neither of these pilots was willing to initiate a go-around, even as the approach continued to deteriorate. Getting back to the report, about 8 seconds after the FO asked for control of the airplane the first time, he said, "We're going to go through it and come back, okay?" likely referring to the runway centerline and indicating an intent to salvage the unstable approach. As the airplane crossed the centerline, the captain said, "It's here," also likely referring to the centerline, and the FO responded, yes, it's here, we are very high," indicating that he was aware that the airplane was not in a position to make a normal descent to the runway. At the same time, the spoilers were deployed. Given the FO's stated intent to overshoot the runway centerline and then return to it, and his recognition that they were high, it is likely that the FO deployed the spoilers and attempted to descend quickly toward a nominal glide path to the runway. Once the airplane crossed the extended runway centerline, it approached a stall and the stick shaker engaged. The FO again requested control of the airplane multiple times, likely motivated by a desire to continue the approach. However, the cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, did not record a positive transfer of control or any indication that the captain had relinquished control to the FO. The FO had acted as an instructor to the captain throughout the flight. Seeing himself in this role might have driven his desire to take the controls in the final moments of the flight. Given the FO's clear motivation to continue the approach and his multiple requests for control of the airplane, it is likely that he improperly attempted to take control of the aircraft without permission from the captain and increased the bank angle of the left turn, which contributed to the left wing stall. In his leadership position as PIC, the captain should have taken decisive action to exercise his authority to ensure airplane control when the FO likely improperly attempted to take control, however he failed to do so. In addition, both the FO's decision to attempt to salvage the unstabilized approach and the captain's failure to intervene demonstrated degraded performance and vigilance. Further, during the final 10 seconds of the flight, the CVR captured reactive statements from both crew members, including the FO's multiple requests for control of the airplane, that suggest that they were not working together. The captain's lack of assertiveness in exercising his authority, each flight crew member's failure to recognize their own psychological stresses, and the flight crew's disregard for safety while attempting to salvage the approach all point to improper CRM in the final moments of the accident flight. Failures in CRM generally describe a lack of clear communication and a failure to recognize degraded performance and vigilance in the cockpit. In this case, poor CRM contributed to the flight crew's degraded performance and competition for control of the airplane, ultimately resulting in a stall. And here's what the NTSB said was the probable cause, quote, "The first officer, or FO's, improper decision to attempt to salvage an unstabilized approach by executing a steep left turn to realign the airplane with the runway centerline, and the captain's failure to intervene after recognizing the FO's erroneous action, while both ignored stall protection system warnings, which resulted in a left-wing stall and an impact with terrain. Contributing to the accident was the FO's improper deployment of the flight spoilers, which decreased the airplane's stall margin, the captain's improper setup of the circling approach, and the flight crew's self-induced pressure to perform, and poor crew resource management, which degraded their decision-making." So a couple key lessons here, I think, for all pilots. The first is that circling approaches are definitely far more risky than straight-in precision approaches, and you should avoid doing them whenever possible. And the second, of course, is that degraded pilot performance should be a red flag to you. And if you or your crew are performing poorly, it might make sense to go around or fly the published missed approach rather than hoping that the bad approach can be salvaged. And if you have feedback or insights about this episode or anything else you'd like to share, please go to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page, and send me an email. And I'll read some of your emails on a future show. Also, think about what kind of value that you get from this show. We're listener-supported, so we use the value-for-value model, so please consider making a donation. It's easy to do. Just join the club, become a member to support Aviation News Talk by going out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. Choose the dollar amount you'd like to pledge, and at the same time, you can read about the things you'll get at the different dollar levels. Or if you'd like to make a one-time donation, go to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal, and when you do, I'll read your name on the show. And thanks to everyone who supports the show in whatever way that you do. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up, and remember that you can always go around. You can